Erev Tov, Rabotai. Let me talk to you about a little about three interesting things in halacha I want to tell you. Number one, right? One time, remember, one lady asked me, Rabbi, are women supposed to do Tikkun Chatzot? Right, this is the question. So if you don't know what this is, right, Tikkun Chatzot, you know what this is?
No.
You don't know. Okay, so I explain to you. You do Tikkun Chatzot? You do? Anybody does here? No. Tikkun Chatzot? Nobody does. Okay. So I explain to you what it is. Tikkun Chatzot is a prayer that they say late night, like after Chatzot, after midnight. Late night. There are some people, who are tzaddikim, Hasidim. What they do is they wake up specially for this, They wake up before the morning. They get up, and they do Tikkun Chatzot. So this prayer is something special, that you say because of the Churban, because of the Galut that we're in, to read that Kadosh Baruch Hu should have mercy on us and rebuild the Bet HaMikdash, right? This is the whole concept, So it's supposed to evoke mercies, of Kadosh Baruch Hu that we're in Galut, and it's a very powerful prayer, By the way, the Mekubalim, they say, according to Kabbala, they say, questions like this, right? What's more important, Tikkun Chatzot or to pray Benetz? Right? This is the question, right? So according to Kabbala, they say, Tikkun Chatzot is more important than Netz. According to Halakha, it's not like that. But according to Kabbala, that's what they say. Very interesting. So the question is like this, right? A lot of people, who are very, devout, Hasidim, they do Tikkun Chatzot. But the question is, what about for women? Are women supposed to do it? That's the question, right? So the truth is, that not every mitzvah that the men do, it's also for the women. We spoke about this, right, the other day. You weren't here, but I talked to you about it separately one time. The question was, if you remember, we spoke about if the woman is supposed to do Birkat HaLevana, Birkat HaChama, right? Birkat HaIlanot. We spoke about this. Right? I gave a darash on this one time. So this is also another question. What about Tikkun Chatzot? Are they supposed to do? So you know what they say, right? The Ben Ish Chai Shalom, he has a book called Rav Pe'alim. Besides, there's a book called Ben Ish Chai, and there's another book called Rav Pe'alim, right? So Rav Pe'alim is Tshuvot, Shelot and Tshuvot in Halakha of the Ben Ish Chai. Several volumes he has there, By the way, they say, that how many books did the Ben Ish Chai write? You know how many he wrote? They say he wrote over 100 books, the Ben Ish Chai. Over 100. The problem is that I think many of them got lost. You know why? Because when they came from Iraq, from Bavel, so when the Jews left, and they had to leave, a lot of things got left behind over there. A lot of books, a lot of sfarim, So they say it got left behind over there, a lot of books in the Ben Ish Chai. And we don't have them.
Maybe it's in a museum over there.
Right?
Which century? This 18th or 17th? Century.
100 years ago. 100 years ago. Yeah, so it's interesting, right? So he has a book called Rav Pe'alim. So over there he writes, something interesting. He says, right, that he sent a question about this, Tikkun Chatzot for women, to his Rabbi. He also had a Rabbi, right? So, this Rabbi, he had a couple of Rabbis, but this Rabbi, who he was? Rabbi Eliyahu Mani. So Rabbi Eliyahu Mani was a big Chacham, a big Kabbalist, and he lived in Eretz Israel. So he sent them a letter to Eretz Israel, because Ben Ish Chai lived in Iraq. Right? So he sent them a letter. He was his Rebbe, when he was young. He asked them questions, about many things, So he sent them a question, do women do Tikkun Chatzot or no? So he told them, he says, women don't do Tikkun Chatzot according to Kabbalah. Again, right there, he says, there are reasons why, it's not shaykh to them, it's not relevant to them. Tikkun Chatzot. So therefore, according to Kabbalah, women are not supposed to do Tikkun Chatzot. Okay, it's no big deal for us, anyway, right? Most of us don't do it anyway, But anyway, it's good to know, right? By the way, according to Kabbalah, similar thing, According to Kabbalah, women are not supposed to do SEFIRAT HaOmer. Same thing, Ben Ish Chai writes also about that. It's not relevant to them. It's not shaykh to them. So therefore, there are some Ashkenazi ladies, by the way, who do SEFIRAT HaOmer. They count the Omer, the Ashkenazis. But we, the Sfaradim, we don't really have to get into this, so much. They even, I think, they make even bracha even. The Ashkenazi ladies, they make a bracha. Even though the women are patur from this mitzvah, they're exempt, but they make a bracha according to custom of the Ashkenazim. The women over there, by them, they make the bracha even though they're not obligated to do the mitzvah. That's their minhag, according to Rabbeinu Tam. Anyway, That's another thing, right? According to Kabbala, they're not supposed to do. By the way, since I'm on this topic, I'll tell you something interesting. I don't know if you ever heard about this. Because there are a lot of people, who learn, when they're young kids, they want to get into Kabbalah, Oh, they hear, wow, Kabbalah is so cool, such a cool thing. They want to learn Kabbalah, all of a sudden their heart, and they find some, crazy rabbi, in the neighborhood, right? He tells them, yeah, I'll teach you Kabbalah, so he's crazy, this rabbi, and he makes him also crazy, the Talmud, They both become crazy, you know what I mean? It's like a disease, you spread it, madbik. Medabek. It spreads from one person to another, this disease, sick disease. That's what it is, So, a lot of people, unfortunately, get suckered into this. There's one young fellow here also who comes here, to the shul. He's not here now, but sometimes he comes, Shabbat, he comes. One time he told me, I went out, I stepped outside with him, and we had a discussion a little bit. So he told me, he says, yeah, I'm learning one of the rabbis over here in the neighborhood. He says, Kabbala, we're learning. I told him, I said, please, get away from this rabbi. Don't learn this, this is not for you. It's not for me, it's not for you, it's not for either. It's not for that rabbi either. It's not for any of us. Don't get involved with this, So Baruch Hashem, in the end, he listened to me, this boy, young man, Not only listened to me, but now he's learning in yeshiva, He became a yeshiva bachur, bachur yeshiva, So Baruch Hashem, little by little, that's how it is. You have to tell people the truth about these things. Anyway, right, so the Ben Ish Chai also had this question, when he was young, I don't know how old he was, maybe 25, He writes also about this. He sent a question to Rabbi Mani, about this also. Should I learn Kabbalah or not? This was the question that he asked. So, read this in Rav Pe'alim, right? There's a tshuva on this, Rabbi Mani answers him, he says, for you, it's too early, you're too young, don't get involved with what he says, Be happy with what you have, don't get involved with Kabbalah. What did he want to learn, in Kabbalah, the Ben Ish Chai? He wanted to learn the kabbanot, of the prayers, just that. Not all the Kabbalah, just the kabbanot of the prayers, the special kabbanot, special, right, concentrations, that you have there. In the tefillot, in the prayers, according to the Kabbalah. So he told him, Rabbi Mani, it's not for you, you're too young. Be happy with what you have, learn regular, Talmud, learn halakha. What do you need Kabbalah for? That's what he told him. Can you imagine? So you see, right, the Ben Ish Chai already at that age, he probably knew the whole Torah already, the whole Talmud, inside out, the whole Shulchan Aruch. But still, Rabbi Mani told him, don't touch Kabbalah. He told him, it's too early for you. Okay, interesting, right? Anyway, right? So as we said, right, the women should not do Tikkun Chatzot, according to Kabbalah. They don't do SEFIRAT Omer either. And that's all. I'm sorry.
No?
Huh?
So it's halakha.
Then what?
It's not.
Right, but as we said, right, the Ashkenazi ladies, they do it, and so, But according to Kabbalah, you're not supposed to do it at all. It's asur for them, it's not relevant to them, Lo shayach, Okay. But according to halakha, it's not like that. It's not asur. They want to, they could count, Without a bracha. Without a bracha. Yeah. Okay, good. Baruch Hashem, we got that. So let's go into another question, It's very interesting. This happens today a lot, because now we have internet. So pictures are being sent, from here to my phone, to your phone, right? Every phone is receiving pictures, people, right? Sending pictures from here. So the question is like this, is a woman allowed to send her picture on the internet,
Married woman?
Is a married woman. Good. Yeah, so married woman, it's even worse, it's even more of a problem. You're right. I'm talking about a single girl, let's say, Single girl. She wants to send her picture, around, to show people how she looks.
If it's a woman or man.
You see his question? He's asking me, what difference does it make if it's a man or a woman? So you know what it is, right? Because the women are beautiful, and men are not so beautiful, I'm not so beautiful. Who wants to look at me? Nobody wants to see me, So, nobody wants to look at my picture. But women, everybody wants to look, right? Everybody wants, Right? It's attractive, right? It's a moshech. That's the thing, right? That's the reason why women, the truth is, that there is a prohibition to look at women, according to Talmud. There is a prohibition. Isur. But there's no prohibition to look at a man, you know what I mean? I could look at you 24 hours a day. Nobody's going to tell me I did a sin. You know what I mean? But if I look at your wife, that's something else. You know what I mean? I'm not supposed to be looking at your wife. You know, that's something else, as you said, right? Married woman.
So only left kitchen and kids.
I'm sorry?
Only left kitchen and kids.
Kitchen and kids. Okay, so any of the questions like this, right? Is a woman allowed to send her picture? So the answer is, Rabbi, as we said, right? According to Talmud, Talmud says that you're not allowed to look at a woman for pleasure, to get pleasure from her, to enjoy her beauty, You're not allowed to do this. They say, even to look at her little pinky, even this you cannot do, Sometimes, it's like a very, very common thing. A person goes to the store, right? He wants to buy something, right? So, the cash register, it's usually a girl there, right? It's not a guy, usually a girl, right? Most of them are girls. So you know what it is, right? You see she's a nice looking girl, and you check out her fingers, as she types in, the kupa, the cash register, And you say, oh, she has such nice fingers. Oh, wow, look at that. Nice. And she has beautiful nail polish, everything, You're not allowed to look at that. You're not allowed to enjoy that. That's the whole thing. That's what we're trying to say. Even that you're not allowed to look at. They say, the Talmud, if you look even at one pinky, of a woman for pleasure, even if you have the Torah of Yoshua ben Nun, you won't be safe from Gehinnom. They're gonna punish you for that also. So if that's the case, right, then a woman should not be sending her picture to nobody. We're not allowed to look at her picture. But it's not so pashut, So what do I mean to say by that? You are allowed to look at a woman, you have to, according to halakha. That's for you, this halakha, right? When you go on a date to get married, right, you have to see her. This halakha, Because maybe you don't like the way she looks, then you're going to marry her, all your life you're going to be looking, You don't want that, right? Nobody wants that, They say, what's the reason why a person is not allowed to marry a woman without looking at her? Because he's going to hate her, she's ugly. He finds something ugly about her, something distasteful. So you're going to hate her all your life, you have to love your wife. So how can you hate your wife? But if she looks ugly to you, you're going to hate her. That's the whole thing, This is the reason why you have to look at the woman. They say, that if you send a shliach, right, let's say, to marry a woman for you, you don't want to go, right? You're too busy, You're Tamid Chacham, you're learning, right? That's a famous Gemara. So you send a shliach, your friend. You tell your friend, go for me, and get this girl for me, take her from me, Do kiddushin, give her a ring for me. You're allowed to do that, by the way, The thing is, they say, that you're not allowed to do this until you see the girl. Something really funny about this, They say that a Tamid Chacham, right? In those days, Tamid Chacham was so tzanua that he never saw what a beautiful girl looks like. He never saw nothing like that. He never saw anything like that. So therefore, he didn't know, how to judge. Right? If you would see a girl, he doesn't know how to judge if she's pretty or not, because he never saw really a woman. He's not used to it. So he doesn't know what's a pretty woman, what ugly woman. They're all for him. It's all the same. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what it is. So they say a person, if he's like this, Tamid Chacham like this, he should go and send his friend, and tell him, listen, go look at this girl. Is she pretty? Tell me, because I don't know if she's pretty. I can't even tell. You understand? So he has to go for you and check, for you, if she's a pretty girl, because otherwise you don't know how to do it. To try to check that. Okay. So anyway, right, the point is, what am I trying to say here? That so therefore, right, according to this, if a woman wants to get married, and she wants to, let's say, send her picture to a shadchan, right, to find a shidduch. So she's allowed to do this, because they have to see what she looks like. Right? There was one gentleman over here, right, who asked me, to set up his daughter, So I told him, first thing, I told him, I said, send me a picture of her. I have to see what she looks like. I have to show, the bachur, what your daughter looks like. How am I gonna, you understand? So when you're dealing with shidduchim, you have to send pictures. You know what I mean? There's no other way. There's a mitzvah, to make sure that you see the girl. You see what you're getting. You have to see it. But otherwise, right? Besides that, you're not allowed to look for pleasure. That's the thing, For pleasure, you're not allowed to look. Just to enjoy it, you're seeing something beautiful. You're not allowed to look at that. So a person has to be careful, when it comes to these things. Depends on what you're looking for and why you're looking. That's the thing, So a person has to make sure, that he's tzanua with these things. One time, one of the bachurim over here who comes here to pray, he asked me something very interesting. He was in high school, right? One of the high schools over here in Queens. So his friend, right, who also goes to the same school, he asked him a question. Listen to the question that he asked him. He asked him a question. He says, "Do me a favor. There's a girl over here, that I like. I want you to, take a picture of her, and give it to me. So he came to me, this bahur, and he asked me, he says, Rabbi, am I allowed to do this? Take a picture of the girl and give it to my friend. So I told him, I said, no, you're not allowed. He's enjoying her beauty. He doesn't want to marry her. They're still in high school. They're kids. They're not getting married. So then I told him, I said, no, you're not allowed to. Don't do that. You're not allowed to take her picture and give it to your friend. This is not allowed. So that's the thing. So it depends. All depends on what you're looking for. A person has to be very careful about these things. Shomer einayim. A person has to watch his eyes. Guard his eyes. Make sure you don't look at something which you're not allowed to look at. They say, I'll finish with this. I don't want to go too long. They say, that they used to ask, the holy Kadosh, Baba Sali, about their family. Why all of them are such Kadoshim? All the Chachamim there in this family. We're all Kadoshim. We're all Tzadikim, Chasidim. They were making miracles. All kinds of things. These people were unusually Kadosh. These people. So they always told everybody that the secret of their family, why they're so Kadosh, is because they watch their eyes. They don't look at things that they're not allowed to look at. That's the whole thing. So they say, that when a person is careful about his eyes, he doesn't look at things which he's not allowed to look at. Hashem shows him things that other people don't see, as a reward for this, that he refrains from looking at things which you're not allowed to look at. So this is what they used to do, that's why they had this power, they could see things. In the family of Baba Sali, they could see things that other people cannot see. You know why? Because they didn't look at things which you're not allowed to look at. So Hashem showed them things, So I'll give you an example and then we'll finish here, There's a story like this about Baba Sali's family, They say that one time there was this child, who was kidnapped from Eretz Israel. Somebody kidnapped him, and they couldn't find the child. True story, So they came to Baba Sali, and they said, Rabbi, please help us. We lost the child. We don't know where the child is. Please help us. You're a kadosh. You're a miracle man. Do something for us, right? So Baba Sali told him. You know what he answered. He says, I don't have this power. He says, my son. He says, Baba Meir, go to him. He says, he has the power to help you with this. He has a special power for this. So listen to this. It's a true story. So Baba Meir, when he saw this couple, parents, came, father and mother. We lost our child. Where's my boy? So Baba Meir told him, listen. He says, your boy, he says, they took him out of Eretz Israel. He's already gone. You know where he is? In London, he says. He told him, they took him to London. They kidnapped your boy, he's in London. So you know what he did? Listen to this. He gave them exactly the address where he is, He says, go to this address in London, you're going to find the boy. So they went over there, they sent the police, they found the boy. He was there in the house, This is the true story, So what gave them the power, to do things like this? Because they didn't look at things which are then allowed to look at. This is the thing, When a person is careful with his eyes, Hashem shows him things that other people cannot see. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. אמן ואמן. רבי חנין ושמר, אצל הקדוש ברוך הוא לתוך ישראל, להפיך הכי בא להם תורה ומצוות, שנאמר חפץ, למען צדקו יגדיל תורה וידיר.